They say a house settles, that the groans you hear are just old wood and pipes talking to each other. But I knew, even as a kid of 7, that our basement was speaking a different language entirely. It started not with a noise, but with a smell, a damp, sweet earthiness that would waft up through the floor vents every Sunday evening, a smell that felt older than the house itself, like opened soil in a forgotten graveyard. My parents dismissed it, blaming a musty rug, but I'd catch my dad, a usually unshakable man, pausing at the top of the basement stairs, his hand on the knob, listening to the absolute silence below before deciding whatever he needed could wait. The basement was my father's domain, a place of toolboxes and holiday decorations, but he'd begun to make excuses, claiming the light bulb was out or he was too tired, a subtle tension tightening his shoulders. The real terror began the night the power went out during a summer storm. With candles flickering, we heard it, a slow, deliberate scrape, scrape, scrape from beneath the floorboards of the living room, a sound that mirrored my father's habit of dragging his heavy toolbox across the concrete basement floor. My mother laughed nervously. "It's just the branches against the house." But my father's face went ashen, his eyes wide with a recognition that froze my blood. He knew that particular scrape. He grabbed a flashlight and descended the stairs, ordering us to stay put, his voice a strange thread. The minutes stretched like hours, the only sound the frantic drumming of rain. Then the scraping stopped. He returned, drenched in a cold sweat, mud caked on his knees, muttering about water getting in. But there was no mud in our basement, and from that night on, the smell changed. It was no longer just earth. It was earth and something metallic, something ripe. And my father, he never went down there again. He started sleeping on the couch, a hammer clenched in his hand, his eyes perpetually fixed on the basement door, which he'd reinforced with a heavy bolt lock on the living room side. Years later, after they'd passed and I was clearing the house to sell, I finally mustered the courage to go down there. The air was thick and cold, stale, and in the far corner, behind the old furnace, I found it. A section of the concrete floor had been chipped away, a crude, narrow hole just big enough for a child to slip into, excavated down into the dark earth beneath the foundation. And surrounding it, pressed into the soft dirt, were not my father's work boot prints, but dozens upon dozens of small barefoot prints, all leading into that impossible pitch-black tunnel. The scrape we heard wasn't something coming up. It was the sound of something trying to get back in. I never sold the house. I couldn't, because sometimes, late at night, I still hear it, the soft, patient scraping from below, now accompanied by a wet, rhythmic sniffing right beneath the floor under my bed, as if whatever is down there has finally learned exactly where I sleep. When I moved into my first apartment, a cheap basement unit that smelled of lemon cleaner and latent despair, the super, Mr. Granger, gave me one rule with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The storage locker at the end of your hallway, the one with the big padlock, don't ever open it. It's just old building junk, pipes and such, nasty in there. It was an easy rule to follow. The locker, just an anonymous gray door amongst other identical gray doors, its padlock shiny and new against the rusting metal. For the first week, the silence of the basement was a heavy, comforting blanket, broken only by the hum of the water heater. Then the whispers began. Not loud, not even clear, just a faint, raspy murmur that seemed to seep from the locker's edges at 3:17 a.m. every single night, a time I came to dread with a primal intensity. It was the unerring consistency that was maddening, the same time, the same low, guttural cadence, like a broken record of a dying man's last confession played on a loop. I told myself it was pipes, the building settling, my own sleep-addled imagination conjuring patterns in the white noise of the city. But the whispers had a texture, a palpable desperation that clung to the air like a bad smell.
I started waking up at 3:15, my eyes snapping open in the dark, heart already pounding, waiting in terrified anticipation for the murmur to begin, and it always did. I began to find things, small dislocations in my world. A single dead housefly centered perfectly on my pillow. The sudden choking smell of cheap cigars in my bathroom, though I don't smoke, the scent so strong it made my eyes water. My books, meticulously organized by author, would be subtly rearranged on the shelves, not by genre or title, but by the color of their spines, creating a weird rainbow gradient that was undeniably intentional. My toothpaste tube, squeezed from the middle, would be neatly rolled from the bottom. These were not hostile acts, but they were deeply, profoundly intimate violations, the work of someone studying my habits, tidying my life according to their own silent logic. I confronted Mr. Granger in the lobby, my voice shaking as I described the whispers. He just shrugged, his face a placid mask, but I saw the way his thumb nervously rubbed the keyring in his pocket. "Old building," he repeated, the phrase now a hollow mantra. "Sounds travel funny through the pipes. You're a young guy, you imagine things." But his eyes, those pale, watery eyes, flicked toward the basement door with a glint of something. Was it fear, or was it warning? The final straw, the thing that shattered any pretense of rationality, was the photographs. I'd wake up to find my digital photo frame, which cycled through a curated album of my family and friends, would always, without fail, be paused on a single specific image at exactly 3:17 a.m. It was a dark, blurry shot taken from a low angle, like from the floor. It showed the foot of a rumpled bed and a pair of worn, scuffed leather shoes placed neatly side by side on the carpet. They weren't my shoes. I didn't own shoes like that. I had never taken that picture. It was a photograph from someone else's life, someone else's perspective, forcibly inserted into my own. I decided to leave, the creeping, insidious violation too much to bear. The feeling of being curated, watched, and edited in my own home had become a prison. On my last night, surrounded by half-filled boxes, the whisper from the locker changed. It wasn't a murmur anymore. It was clearer, a desperate, guttural, "Help me, please." It was a voice frayed with terror. In that moment, fear was eclipsed by a surge of horrified, crushing responsibility. This wasn't just pipes. Someone or something was trapped in there. Driven by a madness born of pity and dread, I grabbed a crowbar from my toolbox, my heart a frantic jackhammer against my ribs, and I went to the locker. I broke the padlock with 3 splintering strikes. The door swung inward on squealing hinges, not into a room, but into a shallow closet-sized space that smelled of dust, sweat, and something sweetly rotten. There was no junk, no pipes, just a single folding chair positioned directly in the center, facing the far wall. And on that wall, taped in a chaotic, obsessive collage, were hundreds of photographs, pictures of me sleeping, my face pale in the moonlight, taken through a gap in my bedroom curtains, me cooking pasta, captured from an impossible angle near the ceiling, close-ups of my hands holding a coffee mug, of the back of my neck as I worked at my desk, pages from my journal photographed. And in the center of this horrific mosaic, a single, crisp, professional-looking photo of Mr. Granger himself, smiling that same vacant, friendly smile, standing right behind me in a crowded supermarket aisle, his hand almost resting on my shoulder. A photo I never took. As I stood there, paralyzed, the world shrinking to the pinpricks of those hundreds of my own eyes staring back at me, I heard the main door to my apartment click open behind me. Keys jingled. Mr. Granger's voice, soft and horrifyingly cheerful, echoed down the narrow hallway. "I see you've met my old roommate. He was always too noisy, so curious. You were always so much better, so quiet." The last thing I saw before the world went black was the folding chair in the locker and the dawning, gut-wrenching realization that it wasn't facing the wall to look at the pictures. It was facing the wall so that whoever sat in it would be staring directly at a small, perfectly smooth, expertly drilled peephole. A peephole that led straight through the concrete wall, right into the darkest corner of my own bedroom. He hadn't been storing junk. He'd been storing an audience.
My brother Leo was the creative one, the musician, so when he convinced our parents to let him convert a section of our unfinished, cobweb-draped basement into a soundproof rehearsal space, it made perfect sense. He spent a summer insulating the cinder block walls with thick foam panels, sealing the door with rubber weather stripping, and installing a heavy vault-like door he salvaged from a bank renovation. He'd spend hours down there, the faint, muffled thump of his bass guitar and the distant crash of cymbals, a comforting, rhythmic heartbeat for the house, a pulse of life in the otherwise silent lower level. After he left for college, the room sat silent and stale, a tomb of abandoned guitar picks, moldering set lists, and the ghost of adolescent ambition. That's when the new sounds began. Not from inside the soundproof room, but from everywhere else in the basement. It started subtly, a faint melodic humming, just a few off-key notes that seemed to emanate from the space behind the washing machine. The soft, rhythmic tap-tap-tapping of a single drumstick on the concrete floor near the water heater, matching the pace of my own walking. It was always just on the edge of hearing, stopping the moment I held my breath and focused on it, leaving behind a ringing silence that felt even more unnatural. I told myself it was memory, auditory ghosts, my own grief for my brother's absence playing cruel tricks on my lonely mind. Then, the recording started. I'd be sorting laundry and hear my own voice, a snippet of a private phone conversation I'd had in the kitchen upstairs 2 days prior, whispered back to me from the dark corner where we stored dusty Christmas ornaments. It wasn't an echo, it was a perfect, crisp playback. One night, frozen in a cold sweat, I took my phone down and recorded the basement's silence for a full hour. When I played it back through my headphones, layered beneath the white noise was a clear, coherent audio track. It was me, from exactly 3 days prior, sobbing on the phone to my best friend about my parents' impending divorce, our most intimate, painful secrets and fears laid bare in a ghostly, disembodied echo. The soundproof room wasn't just replaying, it was composing, using the stolen sounds of our lives to create something new. I tried to destroy it. The hammer bounced off the black material as if it were hardened rubber. Lighter fluid wouldn't ignite. It was feeding on my panic, absorbing the sounds of my destruction. I moved out the next day, leaving everything behind. The new owners, a young couple, called me a month later, their voices bright and cheerful. They wanted to thank me. They said the previous owner had left a wonderful surprise, a beautiful pre-built soundproof studio in the basement. Their teenage daughter, a budding songwriter, just loves it down there. She spends all her time in it, writing the most personal, heartfelt songs. The mother mentioned with a puzzled laugh that the girls' new lyrics were uncanny, almost as if she'd been listening in on their private family moments, setting their arguments and inside jokes to melody. I tried to warn them, to form the words, but my voice caught in my throat, strangled by a guilt so profound it felt like drowning. All I could hear in the background of their call, clear as a bell beneath their chatter, was a faint melodic humming, a perfect, loving rendition of a lullaby my mother used to sing to me as a child, a song I had never, ever sung or spoken of in this house, a memory I believed was mine alone. The room wasn't just replaying, it was composing, using the stolen sounds of our lives to create something new. I tried to destroy it. The hammer bounced off the black material as if it were hardened rubber. Lighter fluid wouldn't ignite. It was feeding on my panic, absorbing the sounds of my destruction. I moved out the next day, leaving everything behind. The new owners, a young couple, called me a month later.
their voices bright and cheerful. They wanted to thank me. They said the previous owner had left a wonderful surprise, a beautiful pre-built soundproof studio in the basement. Their teenage daughter, a budding songwriter, just loves it down there. She spends all her time in it, writing the most personal, heartfelt songs. The mother mentioned with a puzzled laugh that the girls' new lyrics were uncanny, almost as if she'd been listening in on their private family moments, setting their arguments and inside jokes to melody. I tried to warn them, to form the words, but my voice caught in my throat, strangled by a guilt so profound it felt like drowning. All I could hear in the background of their call, clear as a bell beneath their chatter, was a faint melodic humming, a perfect, loving rendition of a lullaby my mother used to sing to me as a child, a song I had never, ever sung or spoken of in this house, a memory I believed was mine alone. The room wasn't just replaying, it was composing, using the stolen sounds of our lives to create something new.
Every basement has that one cold corner, but ours was different. It wasn't a draft, it was a perfect geometrical pocket of absolute winter-deep cold that hung in the air near the old bricked-up coal chute, a chill so intense it made your teeth ache and your breath plume in visible, shuddering gusts, even in the sweltering humidity of a July afternoon. We treated it as a novelty, our natural fridge, storing extra sodas and beer there that would emerge frosty. My grandma, visiting from the old country, took one step down the stairs, crossed herself violently, and refused to go further, muttering in Lithuanian about hollow places and earth that remembers. We laughed it off, attributing it to her old-world superstitions. The change was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. The cold spot began to move. You'd be folding laundry and feel the temperature plummet around your ankles, a creeping, invasive frost that climbed your legs like icy water. One morning, we found the family dog, a hardy and fearless German shepherd, shivering and whimpering in his crate upstairs, a perfect foot-wide circle of condensation frozen onto the hardwood floor beneath him, though the rest of the house was warm. Then came the whispers. Not in words, but in psychic sensations, a wave of profound, soul-crushing loneliness that would wash over you if you stood in the cold for too long, accompanied by the faint, phantom scent of coal dust and old dried roses, a funeral parlor smell. Desperate for a rational explanation, I dove into the house's history at the local library. The records were bland. The previous owner, a reclusive widow named Eleanor Voss, had died peacefully in her sleep upstairs. No tragedy, no scandal. On a whim, I spent hours scrolling through microfiche of archived local newspapers, my eyes straining. And then I found it. A tiny one-paragraph article buried in the Evening Chronicle from March 12, 1952. It noted that a young woman, a live-in maid named Clara Brennan, had gone missing from the Voss residence. The article, dripping with the casual sexism of the era, speculated she'd run off with a suitor, perhaps to the city. The last person to see her? The lady of the house, Mrs. Eleanor Voss, who stated Clara had been sullen after being accused of stealing a silver hairbrush. That night, armed with a borrowed thermal camera, I went downstairs alone. The screen showed the basement in a gradient of oranges and yellows, except for one area. The cold spot was a violent, pulsating smear of purple and black, a cancer of cold in the thermal world. As I watched, holding my breath, the cold began to flow. It snaked like slow glacial lava across the concrete floor, crept up the stone foundation wall, and coalesced directly in front of the sealed coal chute. On the camera's screen, the chilling mass formed the clear, shuddering outline of a human figure, hunched and small, with its face pressed against the very spot where the chute door would have been. And then, in the absolute ringing silence of the basement, I heard it. Not in my ears, but in the center of my mind. A voice, brittle with decades of frost and sorrow. She said I stole the silver.
I didn't. I would never. She was angry. She locked me in the chute to teach me a lesson, to think on my sins. The latch, it stuck from the outside. I called until my voice was gone. It is so cold here. The cold didn't just vanish when I ran screaming upstairs. It followed me. It's here, in my new apartment, a migrating patch of impossible winter that sits in a different chair each night, a silent, freezing companion. And sometimes, in the deep quiet of the witching hour, I feel that wave of loneliness so potent it brings tears to my eyes, and I catch the fleeting scent of roses and coal dust. I know what it wants. Clara wants. It doesn't want to haunt. It wants to be found. It wants its bones to be let out of the dark, to be properly buried. But I am too afraid, too cowardly to go back to that house and tear open that sealed chute, to face what's left of her. So I just live with this cold, silent tenant, this ghost of a wronged girl who followed the one person who finally listened, who learned her name. I bear her frigid presence like a penance, and I know she'll be with me, freezing and lonely, a constant, shivering reminder of a forgotten injustice until I find the courage to set her free, an act that feels more terrifying than the haunting itself.
We bought the house, a sprawling Tudor revival, largely because of the finished basement. Ideal for a home theater, the realtor beamed, her voice echoing in the wood-paneled, shag-carpeted space that was a perfect, undisturbed time capsule from the 1970s. A built-in projector screen dominated one wall, and a heavy avocado green projector sat on a shelf like a sleeping mechanical beast. In a dusty teak cabinet, we found a box of old 8mm film reels, their labels faded but cheerful. Mike's 5th birthday, Christmas '74, Lake Trip. We assumed they were innocent family memories of the previous owners, a charming artifact. One rainy Saturday, for a laugh, we threaded up Mike's 5th birthday. The film was silent, its color bleached to a shaky sepia. It showed the very same basement, awash in garish streamers, a clown making balloon animals, kids playing pin the tail on the donkey. It was charming, nostalgic. Then the camera panned unsteadily across the room towards the corner where our new oversized sectional now sat. There, standing apart from the shrieking children and chatting adults, was a tall, thin man in a rumpled, ill-fitting suit, his face a completely blurred smudge, as if the film itself refused to focus on him. He wasn't moving, he wasn't interacting, he was just staring at the children. A weird uncle, we reasoned. The film cut abruptly, then showed a later scene, the basement empty, party detritus littering the floor. The same man was still there, in the exact same spot, his blurred face now turned slightly, as if looking directly at the camera, at us, the future viewers. We laughed it off, a strange editing choice or a flaw in the film. The next reel, Christmas '74, was worse. It was a cozy scene of presents being opened by the tree. Every time the camera moved or panned, the blurred man was in the background, standing motionless behind the glittering tree, reflected in the dark glass of a window, a static smudge in the hallway leading to the laundry room. He was a constant, watching fixture, a glitch in the family's happiness. The final reel had no label. It was just static at first, then showed the basement empty at night, illuminated only by the harsh flickering light of the projector itself, creating a dizzying meta-display. The film was showing the room it was being projected into, and in the center of the room, the blurred man stood, facing the screen. Slowly, with a dreadful, deliberate grace, he raised an arm and pointed, not at the camera, but off to the side, towards the basement stairs, as if directing the viewer's attention to something off-screen. The film ended with a final, snapping burst of static. We were deeply spooked, but rationalized it as an elaborate, tasteless art project by a previous owner.
We made the mistake of burning the reels in the backyard fire pit, thinking fire could purify the unease. That's when the new footage started appearing. Not on film, but on our own digital devices. Reviewing footage from our porch security camera, we'd see him, a tall, static blur standing in the far corner of the backyard at 3 a.m., perfectly motionless, facing the house. In the background of a casual selfie my wife took making coffee, he'd be there, a smudged figure in the hallway mirror. He was migrating from analog to digital, a ghost in the machine. The final, undeniable proof came from the baby monitor. Our infant daughter's nursery was upstairs. The video feed showed her sleeping soundly in her crib, but on the audio feed, clear as a bell, we heard the distinct mechanical click whir of the old projector turning on in the basement, the flapping sound of film through a gate, and then the faint, tinny sound of children laughing from that long-ago birthday party. And then a new sound, a deep, wet, ragged breathing, amplified as if someone was pressing their mouth directly against the monitor's microphone in the nursery. We sold the house in a panicked fire sale rush, losing tens of thousands. A year later, driven by a morbid, itching curiosity, I found the new owners on social media. Their latest post was a proud, glossy photo of their newly renovated ultimate home theater basement. The picture showed a state-of-the-art 4K projector, stadium seating, and soundproofed walls. In the dark, reflective surface of the massive screen, you could just make it out. Amid the reflections of the plush red chairs, a tall, blurred shape stood amongst the seating, facing forward, eternally watching. The caption read, "Movie nights just got a whole lot scarier." They thought it was a trick of the light, a funny reflection. I knew the truth. He wasn't tied to the old film or the house's physical structure. He was tied to the act of watching, to the medium itself. We hadn't gotten rid of him by leaving. We'd just given him a better screen, a higher definition to haunt, and a new family to watch. Their every movie night now a double feature they'd never asked for.
The house was a steal because the basement was listed as unfinished and awkwardly laid out, accessed only by a rickety pull-down door tucked under the main staircase, a claustrophobic affair that felt more like climbing into an attic. What the glossy listing photos omitted, and what we only discovered after the moving trucks left, was the other set of stairs. They were hidden behind a heavy, iron-banded door set directly into the basement's fieldstone foundation, a door so seamlessly integrated with the wall we'd initially mistaken it for a weird architectural quirk. A large, old-fashioned skeleton key hung on a rusty nail beside it, an obvious invitation. Our curiosity overpowered our trepidation. The lock turned with a grating shriek of protest. The door opened inward, releasing a breath of air so cold and stale it made us cough. It smelled of wet stone, deep earth, faint mushrooms, and something vaguely, unsettlingly coppery. The stairs beyond were not modern. They were hewn from the bedrock itself, narrow and treacherously steep, descending into a blackness so absolute it seemed to swallow the beam of our flashlight. We slammed the door, locked it, and vowed to pretend it didn't exist, a pact sealed over a bottle of wine. But the house, it seemed, had a will of its own. We'd wake to find the main basement door latched but inexplicably ajar. The skeleton key would be found lying on the floor in front of the stone door, though we'd hung it back on its nail. Once, after a rainstorm, my wife swore she saw a trail of muddy, child-sized bare footprints leading from that door to the drain near the washing machine, prints that evaporated as we watched. We called a priest, a friend of a friend, who walked the property's perimeter, said prayers in every room, and left looking perplexed. "There is nothing demonic here," he told us, wiping his brow. "No presence of evil. But there is something invited, something that has an agreement." We were baffled, even more scared. The final clue came from the attic,
hidden inside the hollowed-out pages of an old family Bible, a bundle of brittle letters from the original owner, Elias Holloway, to his brother, dated between 1888 and 1891. He wrote of discovering a natural cavern system beneath the property during excavation, of hearing sounds like distant rhythmic chanting that would rise through the stone, and of the quiet ones he believed dwelled in the deep places. His tone shifted from curiosity to reverence, then to frantic necessity. In the last letter, his handwriting a spidered scramble, he wrote, "I have made a bargain, brother. They are not demons, they are custodians. They take the noises, the emotional echoes, the shouts, the sobs, the slams, the rancor that rises from a house and seeps into its bones. They soak it up like a sponge, leaving peace behind. In return, they ask only for a door left unbarred on the new moon and a gift of silence from the dwellers above." He detailed the ritual, a simple bowl of well water drawn from the house's own well, placed at the threshold of the stone stairs, and absolute unwavering silence from sunset to sunrise. "They keep the house clean of echoes," he stressed, "but you must never, never go down to thank them, never look, never acknowledge. The bargain depends on mutual ignorance." We'd been violating the treaty for months. Our heated arguments about money, my wife's slammed doors after stressful calls, my late-night horror movie marathons, all that sonic clutter had been flooding down into a place that had been silently filtering it for over a century, and we'd given nothing in return. The next new moon, trembling with a fear more ancient than ghosts, we performed the ritual. We placed the ceramic bowl of well water, killed the circuit breakers, powered down every phone, and sat together in the living room in utter, profound silence. The tension was a physical weight. Around 2 a.m., we heard it from behind the basement door. A soft, wet slurping sound, then the gentle, definitive clink of the empty bowl being placed back on the stone floor. An overwhelming, impossible sense of peace then draped the house, a silence so deep and clean it felt like forgiveness. We've kept the bargain for 2 years now. Our home is a sanctuary of preternatural calm, but the cost is heavier than silence, because now, on the nights after the new moon, I have visceral, waking dreams. I'm standing on those stone stairs, looking down into a vast, fungal-lit cavern. Below, in the shimmering dark, things that are shaped almost, but not quite like people are moving slowly. They are weaving, using shimmering threads pulled from the very air, threads that are the echoes of every harsh word, every betrayed sob, every slammed door this house has ever absorbed. They're stitching together a vast, complex tapestry from the noise, and the tapestry is nearly complete, a horrifying, beautiful record of every sin of sound ever committed here. In the dream, one of the weavers always turns its faceless head upward. I feel its gaze, and I understand, without words, a final terrible clause of the bargain Elias never wrote down. When the tapestry is finished, their work here is done. The silence they've sold us is not permanent, it's a lease, and they will need a new source of noise, a new house to clean. The door, I realize with a dread that chokes me, works both ways, and absolute silence, once you get used to it, becomes its own kind of screaming prison, where every beat of your own frantic heart sounds like a drum, calling them up to find the source.